preparedness and response. So tackling overweight and obesity is one of the very important health improvement areas for which I'm responsible. And you'll hear later this morning from Gary Maxwell, who's in my team leading on this particular area. But before we begin, I just wanted to make a few introductory comments really about why we're here today, talking specifically about the economic and ethical imperatives for tackling childhood obesity. And I think, put very simply, it's because childhood obesity is preventable, but it sets our kids up for lifelong difficulties and costs us a lot. So, some headlines about what really makes you stop and think about this. Evidence shows that obesity reduces life expectancy by up to 9 years, so that's a long time. Obesity increases the risk of Northern Ireland's biggest killers, coronary heart disease and cancer. It also increases the risk of developing type 2 diabetes, so women who are obese are 10 times more likely to develop type 2 diabetes than women who are not overweight. Obesity also impacts on emotional health and well-being and self-esteem, particularly among young people. And it is a huge cost to our health service, but not just our health service. The costs go much more wider than that, and that's what Kevin's going to talk about. So in addition, obese children are more likely to become obese adults. And children of obese adults are significantly more likely to become obese. So we create a perpetual cycle, self-reinforcing there, which increases the overall level of obesity and overweight. Overweight and obesity rates are also consistently higher in areas of deprivation when you compare them to the least deprived areas. So there's clear links here with health inequalities which we are seeking to address. We also know that the impacts of obesity build up over many years. So we need to ensure our children and young people are making healthy choices now to ensure that they maintain a healthy weight and can remain healthier as they go through their lives and their life course. So there's many reasons for us to be concerned and to direct our attention and our energy sternly and strenuously towards this topic and subject area. So if I turn now to the agenda, we're going to hear first from Mimi Tatlow-Golden from the Open University about the marketing of food to children. We're then going to hear from Professor Kevin Belander from the Institute of Public Health Ireland, who's going to talk to us about the lifetime cost of childhood obesity in Northern Ireland. And then finally, Gary Maxwell, who I mentioned before, who's from my own team in the Department of Health here in Northern Ireland, to talk about Northern Ireland's approach to tackling childhood obesity. So with that, I'll hand over to Mimi.
Hi everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Liz, and for the invite, Kevin. So I'm a lecturer in developmental psychology and childhood studies at the Open University. Formerly, I was based in Dublin. And so in that time, a lot of the work I've done has been Island of Ireland work. So colleagues on former projects, some of which I'm going to talk about, are actually here today, which is lovely to see. And a chunk of the work that I do looks at children and food marketing. So other aspects of food as well, but a lot of focus on food marketing. And I'm going to just give you a few little sort of introductory bits and pieces to give you a bit of context, and then I'm going to run through a couple of studies on Island of Ireland food marketing around children's knowledge and adults treat giving. I'm then going to kind of pivot a bit, because the whole issue of marketing, which for quite a few years was really focused on broadcast and the regulations that existed, were focused on broadcast media, has obviously shifted now, and we're in a digital era, and marketing has changed utterly. And so that's where a lot of my efforts are now focused when I work with WHO and other people on the issue. And finally, what I'm going to do then is come to look at policy opportunities that we have on the island in a total, because it's sort of a funny time of confluence of action and interest from legislators and policymakers, both in the UK and in the Republic. Okay, so just to kind of give you a bit of background and context here, this study funded by the Irish Heart Foundation, which you can access the PDF for by just Googling the title, so it's housed on their site. They came to me after I'd done a lot of work on preschool children, which I will come to in a minute, and said, well look, maybe wouldn't you do a study about how children are exposed to advertising and marketing in digital media? And I said, sure, that'll be fine because all the data exists, so we'll be able to scrape those and that'll be straightforward. And that sent me down a rabbit hole that was 3 and a bit years ago now. We still don't have that. We're now at WHO level trying to develop monitoring tools for reasons that I will go to in a minute. Anyway, but this is where it all started. And I still like this report because it's got some nice simple introductions, and I find that people find it very helpful to get a sort of a read on the issues in a relatively short space of time. So after that, I linked up with WHO to work with them, and we wrote with colleagues in the UK and at Liverpool and at WHO. We wrote this report, which came out in 2016, and sort of set the research agenda, which we've been looking to build on ever since. Again, if you want more detail on sort of the key issues, broadening out into data and understanding what the sort of mechanisms by which children are targeted online in digital media with ads for high fat, salt, sugar products, you'll find those in that report, which again is available from the WHO website. If you just Google that title, you'll get to it. And just to give you a reminder, I'm sure most of you are here because you're interested in these issues, so you'll be reasonably familiar with it, but I think it's always helpful to remember that we're up against quite something here, right? So this was a calculation that the Obesity Health Alliance made of the ad marketing spend of just 18 of the major brands in the UK, and it's 27.5 times the spend on Change for Life, all right? So if you look at how are you spending money in terms of marketing and who's spending it and what are they spending it on compared to what public health efforts are spending or have available to them in terms of looking to change behaviours, which is really the goal of programs like Change for Life, we're really up against it. And so Liz mentioned that phrase that we hear so often. We talk about healthy choices in this field. And I'm trying to put everybody on a strict diet of never using the term healthy choices. And that's not because I want to remove agency from people, because agency is incredibly important. I am a psychologist, but I work at the borderline of childhood studies, and we think a lot about children's experiences and their capacities and rights as agentic beings, if you like. But I think it's really important to bear in mind that if you put a child in particular, but an adult as well in fact, into an environment which is utterly saturated with a certain kind of message, and then say, now you go off and make choices that go in the opposite direction, you're asking them to do something that they're actually emotionally, physically, biologically not able to do. And their families, their parents are equally affected by all of this. So I don't know if today we can come up with one. I'm still putting this challenge out to people to say, let's find a different phrase. One that is, other than healthy choices, that has something about, or the other option is flip the parameters of choice onto the marketers, all right? And say, well, why are you marketing to kids? Why are you making that choice? And in what way is that okay? And one of the reasons that I like to ask that question, just going back to that report and the one previously, is that the work that I do is really framed within a rights context. So I draw on the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is 30 years old next year, to focus on the sense that children have rights to participate in life, which includes participating in media and receiving information. And so the answer to all of this is not to say, get off all the media, but they also have rights to protection. We are mandated as states to provide environments in which they can live lives to their fullest and in which we can support parents to do so. So there's a clear international legal mandate for this kind of work to take place. And I just popped this slide in here. I hadn't actually seen this when it came out a couple of months ago from the Obesity Policy Research Unit, so I'm just going to kind of set this up briefly now. Since 2006, the figure of marketing being responsible for 2% of children's food choices has been doing the rounds. And industry use it consistently when they make submissions to consultations, because it turned up in this Ofcom report in an annex as a result of a literature review by Sonia Livingston, who's a prof at the LSE in London, saying that there wasn't that much evidence, but figures such as 2% were suggested. All right, and you know the way of these things. Something gets published by someone authoritative in an authoritative source, and it gains a sort of attraction that is very hard to undo. But at UCL in London as well, the newly formed Obesity Policy Research Unit has gone back to try and find out where did this 2% figure come from. And they think the only logical place where it could have been derived was from this article by Bolton in 1983, which was a study of children's snacking behaviour. And their understanding is that it was misinterpreted in the Ofcom report. Okay, that the figure that makes sense to report from that study itself, which is only a study of snacking behaviour, and the snacking obesity link is not the whole story, as you'll know. So 23% is a closer estimate for what they reported from their figures in that original study, plus that study is weak in all kinds of ways. The data were from 1977, they're from a high socioeconomic status group. It's only about snacking. It doesn't allow for indirect effects. So you have a direct effect, but indirect effects are important as well, obviously. So that 2% figure needs to die a death. And we all need to kind of get on the messaging around that. It's very important because it's not reliable at all. And so part of the equation is, for us, anybody who's interested in dealing with this issue, is to question that number when it comes up as industry talks about the tiny effects that advertising actually has on children's eating behaviour, which obviously it's in their interest to argue. Okay, so a couple of studies on food marketing. These are funded by Safe Food and were carried on an all-island basis. Way back when, in 2011, 2012, Lindsay and I were both postdocs working on food marketing in the preschool child. Wasn't that the name of the whole study, Lindsay? And so there were a number of papers that came out of this. One of them was an analysis of what I call the advertised diet on the island of Ireland. So this is regulation compliant, okay, so it's following all the regulations. And you'll be aware that we like to say, both in the Republic and in the UK, that we have one of the strictest regimes of restricting marketing to children in broadcast media. And that is actually true. But even in this context, what do we see? So what we did was we said, okay, we're not just going to look at this thing called children's programming, which is where all the regulations are focused, but we're going to look at what TV do kids actually watch, as opposed to what TV is directed at them, okay? And so we got data that showed what are the times of day and the days of the week when kids are watching, which channels are they watching the most in the North and the Republic, and we then sampled from those. And concluded that even though this is regulation compliant television, even though these are very young children, they're still being exposed to more than half of ads, so more than half of ads that they see are for unhealthy items that are not supposed to be being marketed to them, allegedly, all right? And that's using the UK nutrient profiling assessment, which is used to determine the regulations, all right, and with a slight amendment in the Republic, the cheese derogation. If you take a stricter nutrient profiling protocol, you'll find that 3/4 of the ads that were shown are not recommended for being marketed, for products not recommended to be marketed to children. All right? So that's the WHO nutrient profiling model, which came out in 2015 and is useful to use. It's nice and simple. It's controversial in some areas because they don't allow marketing for, say, Diet Coke or things like that. So diet drinks that carry a brand that has a very heavy HFSS profile is not permitted. So you can find out more about that in that paper. We calculated, based on estimates of children's TV viewing, that they were being exposed to about 1,000 ads for unhealthy items a year in the Republic and guts of 800 in the North. That's a lot of ads for something that you're not supposed to be seeing at all a number of years ago, pre-digital. All right. We can assume that that remains reasonably much the same, I understand. Okay, we also did some work with preschool kids and creches, and we found that they had high awareness at the ages of 3 to 5 of fruit and vegetable knowledge and saying that's a healthy thing to eat, but they were much less aware at this little age of sweets, cakes, ice cream being not so healthy to eat, and they were least of all aware that sort of fast food and fried foods and things like that were things that they shouldn't be recommending somebody would eat to be, as we described it, big, strong and healthy. So that was the phrase we used with them. That's obviously a complex equation to get through to young children if you're thinking about building their knowledge, because everybody knows, everyone who's had small children knows that there are times when you're encouraging them to eat and you'll be grateful if they'll eat anything. So these issues are not simple, but it was interesting to find out that they had ceiling levels of recognition that fruit and veg were good to eat. However, the same group of children, when shown both healthy and unhealthy logos for both unhealthy and healthy food brands, were much better at matching a logo without the image of the food to an image of the food for unhealthy brands rather than healthy brands. Okay? So, what does that picture tell us? That tells us that they're getting a certain amount of information, but we all know that certain kinds of knowledge about this is healthy don't necessarily translate into behavior. So from a very early stage, they've got these high levels of knowledge about fruit and veg, but much more effective in the brand world is the unhealthy food marketing. Okay? So, like from day one, they're in conflict there. And by the time they're 5 years old, they're recognizing 9 out of 10 logos for unhealthy items and really rapidly increasing their knowledge in terms of being able to name the food as well. This knowledge about the brands also takes a leap between the ages of 3 and 4 years. All right, significant difference. Whereas the knowledge about fruit and veg and what's healthy and not comes on stream later. All right, and starts to increase later. So they're learning more about unhealthy brands before they're learning about the healthier foods. That's the key take home from that. All right, and just now, a couple of weeks ago, this is a new study looking at treats and adults treat giving on the island of Ireland again. And as you can see, we sampled from a broad selection, oversampling for lower SES from a range of people who are involved in caring for children. What came out of this study was there was a set of focus groups and then this survey. What came out of the focus groups in particular was that treats are deserved. So the sort of I'm worth it messaging from marketing has really permeated very effectively. That's my interpretive leap, by the way. That's not something that the study can conclude based on the data. But what was really noticeable was that people were saying, I have a treat, I deserve it. But it's not a treat because there are treats every day. And at the very least, they're weekly and often more frequent than that. Okay? So they initially, when they say a treat is something occasional, and then you talk about how often does a treat get supplied in your family, to yourself, to your children or whoever, and it emerges as they talk in the focus group that treats are actually a very frequent occurrence. Why do they give children treats? To reward them, because their child is asking, and to make their child feel better. So what are we doing with these behaviours? We're setting children up to feel that they deserve a treat, all right, because they've done something good, so they're deserving unhealthy foods in the majority of cases. They're responding to pester power by rewarding the pestering, so when the child asks for it, I give it to them. And they're setting up emotional eating through giving a child a treat to make them feel better. So those three reasons alone, I think, are cause for concern, and I think there's a lot of work to do to counteract that. I see this as sitting right smack bang in the middle of all the marketing activity, because it really